Alright, so this topic of video is kind of interesting and new to me, but I keep seeing some of the same Sony conversations pop up on my feed, and after a while it's hard to ignore. Not because the rumors give you something to think about, but because of what they say about where Sony is right now. And honestly, I think Sony is at a really interesting point. They don't need to prove anything anymore. Autofocus, it's still unreal. Video specs, way more than most of us are using, and reliability, it's why so many working shooters stick with them. I think that's worth saying out loud for a second. Sony didn't get here by accident. A lot of people built real businesses, real careers on Sony cameras. So this isn't coming from a place of frustration. It's more curiosity. But at the same time, there's this quiet feeling that I've felt especially that Sony's been playing it safe. Not in a bad way, not in a they're falling behind kind of way, but just safe. And that's where some of these rumors kind of start to matter, because it feels less like what new thing can this camera do, and more like what does Sony actually care about now. The rumor that keeps coming up the most is the FX3 Mark II, and that makes sense. The FX3 is kind of everywhere at this point. Weddings, YouTube, documentaries, short films, brand work, you get it, but it's becoming this go-to camera for people who actually shoot. And honestly, that's important, because when a camera becomes that common, updating it isn't just about specs, it's about not breaking what people already trust. So the idea that Sony would do a real update to it is interesting. The big rumor is a 24 megapixel global shutter sensor, and basically the same concept as the A9 Mark III, but built for video shooters. And if that's true, that's not a small upgrade. That's Sony saying we're willing to bring our best tech into the cameras people actually use every day. Global shutter isn't one of those things that you just, you can't just explain that to clients. It's something you feel when you're shooting. Movement looks cleaner, handheld feels easier, and you just stop worrying about fast motion. The camera just gets out of the way a little bit more. And that's what makes this exciting to me, not the spec, but the experience. Because once a camera stops pulling your attention away, you start thinking more about framing and timing, emotion, the stuff that actually matters when shooting. And from trusted sources like SonyAlphaRumors.com, the FX3 Mark II isn't just some future concept. It apparently could be ready, which tells me Sony isn't just experimenting here. They're pretty confident. It seems that they may actually be making a decision. Now, the other camera worth talking about is the A7R6. This one feels a little quieter, but still very important. The rumor there is a new 80 megapixel sensor, which sounds boring until you think about what that actually fixes. Speed, readout, and low light performance. Those have always felt like trade-offs with high-resolution cameras. Amazing detail, but you feel like you're giving something up. And if you've ever owned one of those cameras, you know that feeling. You love the files, but you hesitate just a little more before pulling it out in tough situations. If Sony can close that gap even a little, that's huge for photographers and hybrid shooters who don't want to choose between resolution and usability. And again, this fits a pattern. Sony doesn't look like they're trying to shock anyone anymore. It looks like they're refining things, tightening the lineup if you will, making their cameras feel more intentional instead of just powerful. And I think that's the bigger story here, because if you talk to a lot of Sony shooters, the complaint isn't that the cameras aren't good enough, it's they don't always feel inspiring. They are incredible tools, but sometimes they feel like tools first and camera second. So when I see these rumors, I'm not really asking, what are the specs? I'm asking, is Sony finally shifting to focus towards how it feels to shoot? Because most of us aren't limited by resolution or autofocus anymore. We're limited by how much we enjoy picking our cameras up. how quickly we can get into a rhythm, or how little the camera fights us. If Sony leans into that, that's honestly a really big move. And if they don't, well, honestly, someone else will. So yeah, I'm not hyped just yet, and I'm not sold. I'm just trying to pay attention at the moment. Because 2026 might be the year Sony reminds people why they fell in love with their cameras in the first place. Or it could be the year they stay the safest option in the room. And honestly, I'm really curious which one they choose. What would you guys prefer in a new Sony camera? Or at least expecting to be in it? Also, this is just a reminder to go grab whatever camera you have and go shoot some type of content, whether for you or socials. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.